Before the Great Pacts had names, before the northern territories were divided by law and blood and season, there was a truth every wolf understood without being taught it. Loyalty was not given lightly, and those who gave it fully, who poured every drop of themselves into the ones they chose, deserved, above all others, to be protected. Aelira had lived by that truth for 3 winters. She had stood at Caldris's right side through brutal cold and brutal war. She had healed his wounded with her own hands, settled disputes so that blood would not be spilled on sacred ground, and spoken for the weak when the strong would not. She had never once asked for more than she already had. She had never once imagined he would take even that away. The night it ended began with snowfall, not the gentle drifting kind that hushed the forest and made the world feel soft and forgiving. This was the kind that came sideways, sharp-edged, relentless, swallowing torchlight and sound alike. The kind of night that made even seasoned hunters stay close to warmth. Aelira stood at the center of the moon circle, her silver-white fur catching the cold light like something carved from the frost itself. Around her, the full pack had gathered in silence. Torches lined the ancient stones. Every face she knew, faces she had fed, faces she had comforted, faces she had watched grow from pup to warrior, was turned toward her now, and not one of them moved to stand beside her. She did not understand why. Not yet. Caldris walked toward her from the far side of the stone circle. His charcoal dark fur was brushed smooth, his posture deliberate and proud, and there was something in the set of his jaw that she recognized. She had seen it before battles. She had seen it before verdicts. She had never expected to be the one standing on the receiving end of it. He stopped 2 lengths from her. The snow kept falling between them. Aelira. His voice carried without effort. It was made for declarations. Before this pack, before the moon, and before the old law, I name you unworthy of the bond you hold. I release you from my side. The place beside me is no longer yours. The words did not feel like words at first. They felt like something physical, like the ground giving way beneath her feet. She stood very still, because if she moved, she was not sure what would happen. She was not sure she would stay standing at all. From the edge of the stone circle, Seraphine stepped forward, amber-coated and graceful, her eyes already fixed on Caldris with the calm certainty of someone who had been waiting a long time for this moment. She took the place beside him without hesitation, as though it had always been hers. Perhaps it had. Aelira turned her eyes to the pack, to Gareth, old, worn-furred, wise, standing near the elder stones. His expression was tight with something that looked like grief, but he did not speak. None of them spoke. The silence was not the silence of wolves who did not care. It was the silence of wolves who were afraid. And that somehow was worse. She left the circle on her own feet, head steady, because she would not give anyone the satisfaction of watching her collapse. She walked out into the storm. She did not howl farewell. She simply walked, her white figure disappearing into the dark and snow, the way a candle disappears when you cup your hand around it and breathe. She did not know then that Caldris was already giving orders behind her. She did not know that walking away would not be enough for him. She did not know that the night was not finished with her yet. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. It is essential that we get your support through subscriptions, likes, and comments. So if this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button for us, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. All right, thank you. Now let's get back to the story. To understand what Caldress took from Aelira that night, I think you first have to understand what she had built. She had not been born into power. She had not come from the great bloodlines whose names were carved into the elder stones. She had come from the eastern fringe, from a small border settlement where the wolves were tough because they had to be, where warmth was something you made yourself because the land would not make it for you. She had arrived in Caldress's pack 3 winters past, after the eastern settlement was absorbed into the northern territory during the Great Consolidation. She had come as one of many, young, quiet, uncommonly skilled at reading people. What she had in abundance was something rarer than size or fighting ability. She could make a wounded wolf trust her in the space of a single breath. She could walk into a room taut with anger and, without raising her voice, suddenly turn it toward calm. Caldress had noticed. In those early days, he had seemed like something worth believing in. He was commanding without being cruel, decisive without being careless. He had chosen her in front of the pack with the quiet certainty of a wolf who knew exactly what he was doing, and she had stood beside him thinking, "This is what I was built for. This is right." She had poured herself into it. Every morning she rose before the pack, every conflict between subordinates. She settled it before it reached Caldress and drained his attention. Every wolf who was struggling in the cold months, she found them, checked on them, made sure they had what they needed. The pack did not always see her work, but they felt it. The way you feel warmth in a room without always looking at the fire. Iskara, one of the pack's senior she-wolves, had once told her quietly, "You are what holds this pack together, Aelira. Not strength, not fear. You." Aelira had smiled and said nothing, because she had not done it for the recognition. She had done it because it was right, because Aluna was not a symbol. She was a living commitment. She had not seen Seraphine becoming a threat. That was her honest failing. Seraphine was elegant and ambitious, and she had understood something about Caldress that Aelira had taken too long to see. He did not actually want a partner. He wanted an audience. He wanted someone who reflected his power back at him, instead of quietly redirecting it toward the good of others. Every time Aelira had softened one of his harsher edicts, had said gently in the private hours, "The southern families are struggling, Caldress. Let us ease the tribute this season," he had agreed. But somewhere in the agreeing, something had hardened in him. Something that read her decency as a challenge to his authority. She had not known that. She had simply kept doing what she believed was right up until the night the snow came sideways and he stood in the moon circle and used the old law to cut her loose like dead weight from a sled. The signs had been there long before the moon circle. She saw that clearly now, walking through the dark with snow biting at her face and the rejection still ringing in her ears. Seraphine had been a fixture of the inner court for nearly 2 seasons. She had come to the pack as the daughter of a southern alpha. A political attachment, Caldress had said at the time. Simply a matter of alliance. Aelira had not worried. So she had seen ambitious she-wolves come and go, and she had never felt the need to compete. That confidence, she now understood, had looked like indifference to Caldress. Seraphine had been careful. She never challenged Aelira openly. She never pushed. She simply made herself endlessly available. Every council meeting where Aelira was attending to a sick pup, Seraphine was there. Every border negotiation where Aelira was mediating a dispute, Seraphine was in the room. She had woven herself into the fabric of Caldress's daily life, so slowly and so quietly that by the time Aelira noticed the pattern, it was already complete. There had been one evening, perhaps 6 weeks before the moon circle, when Aelira had walked into the war room to find Caldress and Seraphine bent over the same map, their voices low and easy. They had looked up when she entered. Caldress had smiled at her with a warmth that did not quite reach his eyes. Seraphine had smiled with her eyes first, which was far more practice than it appeared. "We were just reviewing the western border claims," Seraphine had said, her voice smooth as river ice. "Your Luna suggested last week that we push the boundary markers south. Caldress and I were working through the implications." Aelira had said, "That's good. I'm glad it's being thought through carefully." She had meant it. She genuinely had. That was the thing about Aelira that Caldress had never understood, and Seraphine had never respected. She did not see the world as a competition. She saw it as a shared effort. Her lack of jealousy had not been naivety. It had been a deliberate choice, rooted in a belief that power used, well, did not need to be guarded jealously. But the court around Caldress did not reward that belief. It rewarded vigilance. It rewarded positioning. And by the time Valeth, Caldress's chief enforcer, began receiving his orders from Seraphine before they reached Aelira's ears, the shift in power was already complete. Gareth had tried to warn her. She remembered it now. He had pulled her aside near the elder stones one gray morning, his old eyes careful, and he had said, "The Alpha listens to different voices now, Aelira. You should be watchful." She had put her hand on his worn shoulder and said, "I trust Caldress, Gareth." He had not answered. He had simply looked at her with the expression of someone who has said the thing they needed to say and cannot make the listener hear it. She understood his silence now. The day of the moon assembly had not felt different. That was the cruelest part. She had woken early, as she always did. She had walked the pack lines in the gray pre-dawn, were checking on the northern den mothers and the pups who had been born in the last cold snap. She had stopped to settle a minor quarrel between Mailer and one of the younger wolves. Something about territory markers on the western training ground. She had done all of it with the easy competence of someone who had been doing it for 3 years. She had dressed for the ceremony with care. The moon assembly happened once per lunar cycle, and it was the moment the pack renewed its bonds. With each other, with the old law, with the land. Aelira took it seriously. She always had. She had even felt, walking toward the stone circle that evening, a quiet pride. She was good at this. Whatever her flaws, she was genuinely good at this. The pack had gathered in full, perhaps 80 wolves, as from the eldest elders to the oldest pups, permitted to attend. The torches were lit. The ancient stones glowed amber in their light. The snow was just beginning to fall. Caldress had taken his place at the head of the circle. Aelira had moved to stand beside him, as she always did. And he had turned and looked at her with those cold, calculating eyes, and she had felt, in the half-second before he spoke, a sensation she had no name for. Not fear exactly, something older than fear. The body's knowledge of what the mind has not yet accepted. Then he had spoken the words, and the world had changed. The rejection ceremony in old pack law was rarely used. It required the alpha to name the dismissed mate before the full assembly, to invoke the moon's witness, and to formally declare the bond severed. It was designed for wolves who had committed genuine betrayal, theft, cowardice, violation of pack trust. It was not designed for what Aelira had done, which was to be too good at caring for others and not good enough at performing devotion for an audience. But the law did not ask for reasons. It only asked for the words, and Caldress had said them. Varric, who stood nearest to Aelira in the circle, had looked away first, then Iskara, then the younger wolves. The silence had moved through the pack like a wave, not the silence of indifference, but the silence of a people who understood that what they were watching was wrong and had decided, collectively, that the cost of saying so was too high. Only Gareth had held her eyes through the whole of it. His gaze had not flinched, but he had not spoken. And she had understood then that even Gareth, who had served this pack for 30 winters, was afraid of what Caldress would do if pushed. Seraphine had stepped into her place with the smooth elegance of a wolf who had been rehearsing the movement for months. And Aelira had walked away. She had given them nothing more than that. No howl of grief, no breaking down. She walked out of the circle and into the storm, and she kept walking, because stopping meant the cold would catch up with her, and the cold, right then, felt like the only honest thing in the world. The northern wilderness did not care about pack politics. It was purely itself. Snow and stone and the black silence between trees, where the wind moved like something alive and old and entirely without mercy. Aelira had spent enough time on border patrol to know these territories, or she knew which slopes held shelter. She knew where the frozen creek ran beneath the ice. A sound you had to listen for, a trap for the unwary. She moved with the mechanical steadiness of someone who has pushed through pain before. Her mind was very quiet. Sometimes grief worked that way. It made you numb in the immediate hours, held the fullness of itself at a distance, until you were somewhere it could pour into you without drowning you in front of witnesses. She had been walking perhaps an hour when she heard them. Footsteps in the snow behind her. Multiple. Deliberate. Not trying to hide. She stopped. She did not turn right away. She breathed the cold air and she thought, with a terrible clarity, he sent them. He was not content with the rejection. He wanted to be certain. She turned. Vaelith led the group. 3 of Caldress's enforcers, their dark forms barely visible in the driving snow. Vaelith was broad and cold-eyed, built for enforcement, and loyal to the hand that fed him without asking unnecessary questions about what that loyalty required. Aelira, he said, no title, not anymore. Vaelith, she said, the Alpha has instructed us to see you, to the edge of the territory. She understood what that meant, the edge of the territory, in winter, at night, without shelter or supplies, was not exile. It was a sentence delivered with plausible distance. Caldress would never say he had ordered her death, but he would ensure it arrived. She looked at the 3 of them, and she made a quiet decision, the kind you make when you know the odds, but choose dignity over surrender. Then lead the way, she said, and she walked with them, not because she had given up, but because she was choosing her moment carefully. Because she had grown up on the eastern fringe, where you survived by reading the situation and not spending your strength before you needed it. Vaelith set a hard pace into the teeth of the storm. The other 2 wolves flanked her. She memorized the path, the landmarks, the lay of the ridgeline above them, storing each detail against the possibility that she would need it later. They walked for a long time. The edge of the ice valley was marked by a single split rock formation that jutted from the snow like a broken tooth. Beyond it, the land dropped steeply into open country, vast and featureless and swept clean by the northern wind. Vaelith stopped at the split rock. He looked at Aelira without particular expression. Beyond here, he said, you are no longer under the protection of the pack. I understand, she said. She crossed the boundary. She did not look back. She heard them standing there for a moment, heard the particular silence of wolves, watching something they are not entirely comfortable with, and then she heard them turn and head back. She walked 50 more paces. Then she stopped and listened. At first, only the storm. Then, after a long silence, a single set of footsteps, much quieter than the others, moving with the careful patience of a hunter who was certain of the outcome and was in no particular hurry. Caldris. He had not trusted Valeth to make certain. Or perhaps he had wanted to be the one. Perhaps there was something in him that needed to see it finished with his own eyes, so that the part of him that had once chosen her could be completely sure she was gone. Aelira ran, not in a panic, but with everything she had, because this was survival now, and every instinct she owned had redirected itself toward one single purpose. She cut left, away from the open ground, toward the ridge where the pines grew close together and the snow cover was thinner beneath the canopy. She was fast. She had always been fast. But Caldris was an alpha, and the gap between them was built on power she could not match in open terrain. He caught her on the lower slope before she reached the tree line. The impact sent her hard into the snow. She hit the ground and rolled, felt something tear, a slash across her side where his claws had connected. And she came up already moving, already calculating. She fought. She fought with everything she had, because she was not the kind of wolf who stopped fighting simply because the odds were against her. She landed 3 strikes that made him check his forward momentum. She used the terrain, the slope, the loose snow underfoot. But the wound in her side was deep, and the cold was already at work. And there came a moment, a single terrible moment, when her legs simply refused to hold her anymore. She went down in the snow. Caldris stood over her, his charcoal fur dark against the white, his breath visible in the cold air. He looked down at her with those eyes she had once believed held something worth trusting. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he turned and walked away. No final words, no justification. He simply left, his figure disappearing into the storm the way a stone disappears beneath black water, quickly and completely, as though it had never been there at all. Aelira lay in the snow. Her blood was very red against the white. Her breath came in shallow pulls. The cold moved through her with the gentle efficiency of something that had been waiting patiently for exactly this opportunity. She pressed her paw against the wound in her side. She looked up at the sky, where the storm clouds moved fast and low, and the moon was invisible behind them. She thought, I am going to die here. And then, with the quiet stubbornness that had always been at the core of her, the stubbornness born from the eastern fringe, from growing up where the land did not make warmth for you. No, not yet. She began, very slowly, to drag herself toward the trees. There is a particular silence that comes before the body gives up. It is not peaceful. It is a falling inward, a narrowing, as though the world is becoming a smaller and smaller circle of light around you, pulling in from the edges until there is almost nothing left. Aelira had reached the tree line. She did not remember clearly how. She had moved on pure instinct, on the part of her that did not know how to stop, dragging herself through the snow with her front legs, while the wound in her side kept telling her it was done. It was over. No more. She found a hollow between 2 fallen pines where the snow had drifted and packed into something that blocked the worst of the wind. She pressed herself into it. She kept her paw against the wound because that was what you did. You did not let the warmth out, you held it in as long as you could. The cold was thorough and absolute, and it was working on her with the patient dedication of something that had all the time in the world. She thought about the pack, about the faces at the moon circle, The ones that had turned away, the ones that had been afraid, the ones that had stood in silence while something wrong was done. She did not feel anger toward them, and perhaps that was itself a kind of strength. She had seen what fear conditioning did to a group. She had watched it in the Eastern Fringe during the years before the Great Consolidation, watched packs that had been built on cruelty slowly lose the ability to imagine any other way. She thought about Gareth, about the expression on his face, the grief that had been genuine even if he had not spoken it. She thought about what she would do differently, if she had another chance. She thought she would do almost nothing differently, except perhaps see the ending coming earlier. She could not regret choosing decency. She could not regret caring for the wolves under her protection. Even now, bleeding in the snow, she could not construct a version of herself that would have been crueler and called it survival. She thought, I would rather die as myself than live as something I don't recognize. It was a strange thought to have at the end, but it was true. The snow kept falling. The circle of light got smaller. And then, through the white veil of the storm, through the curtain of snow and cold and the narrowing dark, something moved. She did not hear it first. She felt it. A warmth that should not have been there. A presence that arrived without aggression, and stepping through the trees with a certainty that was nothing like the practiced dominance of coldest. This was different. This was something older. She turned her head, slowly, because turning it quickly was no longer possible, and she looked toward the edge of the clearing, and she saw him. He was enormous. That was the first thing. Not in the way that coldest was large, with the cultivated size of a wolf who had trained for dominance, but in the way of something ancient and unconstructed. His coat was silver, not pale gray or washed white, but true silver, the color of moonlight hitting metal, and it seemed to hold its own light even in the dark of the storm. His eyes were pale blue, not the flat, cold blue of a calculating wolf, but the deep, steady blue of winter sky at the moment just before dawn, when the light is returning, but the dark has not quite finished. He stood at the edge of the clearing, and he looked at her. He did not advance immediately. He read the situation the way an experienced wolf reads terrain, taking in the wound, the blood in the snow, the body that had dragged itself this far on determination alone. His posture was not aggressive, not even cautious. He was simply very, very present, the way a mountain is present, not demanding your attention, but having it completely. Solvain. She did not know his name yet. That would come later. Right now, he was only a silver shape in a storm, and she was beyond the point of fear. If he had come to finish what coldest had started, there was nothing left in her to stop him. She held his gaze. He moved toward her, slowly, no sudden motion. He circled once, not with the territorial circling of dominance, but the careful arc of a wolf checking the edges of a situation, making sure they were alone. Then he lowered himself to the ground beside her. The warmth of him hit her like something solid. She had not realized how completely the cold had occupied her until warmth displaced it. She felt her body attempt to respond. A faint shudder, the beginning of the thaw that precedes proper recovery. He pressed himself close without crowding her, not with possession, with intent. She said, her voice barely carrying above the storm. I don't know who you are, he said, his voice low and unhurried, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to reach you. I know. Rest now. Names can wait. She wanted to ask him why. Why here? Why her? Why now? But the warmth and the exhaustion and the strange calm that comes when you have been certain of death and are suddenly uncertain of it? All of it moved through her at once. And for the first time since she had walked out of the moon circle, she let herself stop fighting for a moment. She did not sleep so much as descend into the space between consciousness and something else, where the body does the urgent work of deciding whether it intends to stay. He stayed beside her through all of it. The storm moved over them. The snow fell and covered their tracks. And somewhere above the clouds, unseen but constant, the moon continued its slow crossing of the sky. She woke to the firelight. Not the open firelight of a camp, but the contained, careful warmth of a den fire, the kind built in a stone-lined pit with the smoke channeled up and away. The smell of it was the first thing. Wood smoke and pine resin and something herbal that she associated distantly with wound treatment. She was lying on a pallet of layered furs. The wound in her side had been dressed, properly, with knowledge. The cold had been pushed back to the entrance of the den, where she could hear the wind working but not feel it. Solvain was across the fire from her. He was awake, sitting with the still quality of a wolf who was entirely comfortable in silence, feeding small pieces of wood into the fire with a deliberate patience. In the firelight, his silver coat was amber at the edges, and his pale eyes were warm in a way she had not been able to see through the storm. He looked at her when she moved. "How long?" she asked. 2 days, he said. She absorbed that. 2 days. Her wound had not killed her, which meant either the injury had been less catastrophic than she feared in the cold and dark, or his treatment had been better than she had any reason to expect. "You dressed the wound," she said. "I did. Where did you learn that?" A slight movement at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. "I have been in the wilderness a long time," he said. "You learn what you need to." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the fire and thought about how to ask the next question without it sounding like accusation. "Why?" she said finally. "Why help me?" He looked at her steadily. "Because you needed it." She waited. He did not add anything to that. He said it the way someone says a thing that is simply true and does not require decoration. She said, "I was rejected by my alpha, cast out. I left to die." She said it plainly because she was past the point of protecting herself from the facts of what had happened. "Whatever I was before, I am none of it now. I have no pack, no claim, no protection." He held her gaze. "You have yourself," he said. "You dragged your body through a winter storm with a deep wound in your side and reached the tree line on will alone. Whatever someone else decided you are worth, what you actually are is something quite different." She did not have an answer to that. She lay still and let the warmth work on her, and the words settle somewhere inside her, in the place where her sense of herself had gone very quiet. Over the days that followed, she healed, not quickly, but steadily, with the methodical determination that had always characterized her. Solvain kept the fire going. He brought food. He changed the dressing on her wound without commentary or ceremony, simply doing the thing that needed doing. He did not push her to talk, but when she wanted to, he was there for it. They spoke in the long hours of the evening, carefully at first, the way two wolves speak when they are still learning whether the other is safe, then with increasing ease. She learned that Solvain was not a rogue in the way she had understood the word, not a wolf cut loose from society by failure or violence. He had chosen solitude. He had come from a line of silver alphas whose authority was recognized under the old law, not the pack law that Caldris operated by, but the deeper law, the law that predated territorial divisions and political alliances, the law that governed wolves before packs had kings. Under that law, a silver alpha could invoke a formal claim, not ownership, but protection. A declaration before the moon that a wolf had been wrongfully treated and was now recognized as standing under older authority. "Have you ever invoked it?" she asked one evening. "No," he said simply. She looked at him across the fire. He looked back without flinching, and there was something in his expression she had not expected. Not just steadiness, but something warmer and more specific than steadiness. A look that said, "I am paying attention to you, not to what you represent or what you can offer. To you." She did not know what to do with that, not yet, but she felt it. The way you feel warmth in a room without always looking at the fire. He came on the 5th day. Aelira knew before she heard him. Something in the air changed, a shift in the way the light lay on the snow outside the den entrance. She had been on her feet the day before for the first time, moving slowly but moving. The wound had closed cleanly. She was not at full strength, but she was herself again in all the ways that mattered. Sylvain was already at the den entrance when the footsteps became audible. He stood with his full height, and the silver of his coat caught the gray winter light and held it. He did not move forward. He simply stood. Caldris came through the trees with Valeth and Malor flanking him. He stopped when he saw the den. When he saw Sylvain, a moment of recalculation moved across his face. He had come expecting to find a body or a dying wolf, not a standing silver alpha, and the faint smell of a properly maintained fire. His gaze moved past Sylvain into the den, found Aelira. Something complicated crossed his expression. She could not tell, at this distance, what it was. Perhaps surprise. Perhaps something uglier. "Stand aside," he said to Sylvain. "This matter concerns my pack." Sylvain said, "She is no longer of your pack. You severed that bond yourself, before witnesses. Under the old law, your authority over her ended the moment you spoke the rejection." Caldris's jaw tightened. "She is on territory adjacent to my border. My concern does not require your permission." Sylvain looked at him for a long moment with those pale blue eyes. Then he said, with a quietness that was far more effective than volume, "Caldris of the northern packs, I invoke the silver claim under ancient law. This wolf stands under my protection, acknowledged before the moon, and her life is no longer a matter you may decide." The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense with the weight of what had just been said. Valeth looked at Malor. Malor looked at his alpha. Caldris stood very still, and Aelira, watching from just inside the den entrance, saw something she had rarely seen in him. He was uncertain. He knew the old law. Every alpha who had studied the northern traditions knew the silver claim. To violate it was not simply a political error. It was a declaration against the foundations of pack authority itself, the ancient framework that gave every alpha's power its legitimacy. Caldris looked past Sylvain one more time. His eyes met Aelira's. She did not look away. She had walked away from his circle once. She had walked away with dignity, because she was not going to give him the satisfaction of collapse. She looked at him now with the same steadiness, and she thought he would see in it something that surprised him. Not hatred, not even anger, simply clarity. The expression of someone who had been through the worst of it and come out the other side knowing exactly who she was. Caldris turned and walked back into the trees. Valeth hesitated for a fraction of a second. Something that was not quite a look at Aelira, but something near it. Then he followed. Malor last, lingering at the tree line for a moment, before disappearing into the forest. Solvain did not move until the last sound of them had faded completely. Then he turned from the den entrance and walked back inside. He sat beside the fire. He looked at Aelira, and she said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "Why did you?" He was quiet for a moment. The fire made small sounds. The wind moved outside. "Because it was right," he said, "and because you are worth protecting." She looked at him across the fire, at the silver of him, steady and warm in the amber light, at those pale eyes that held a warmth she had not expected from someone who had chosen solitude. She said, "Solvain." "Yes, thank you." He nodded once, simple and complete. The days that followed moved differently. There was no single moment of transformation, no sudden clarity, no blinding revelation. What happened was quieter and more real than that. Aelira healed. She regained her strength. She began, carefully and tentatively, to rebuild the sense of herself, that the rejection and the storm and the blood in the snow had stripped away. Solvain gave her space to do it. He did not push. He did not try to fill the silences with reassurance, which she was grateful for. She had been around wolves who used reassurance as a form of control, making the other person dependent on being constantly told they were all right. Solvain simply existed beside her, steadily and without demand, and let her find her own ground. There was an evening, the 9th or 10th day she had lost track, when the storm finally broke. The sky cleared to a deep, true black, and the stars came out in their full winter brightness, and the moon emerged from behind the last of the clouds and lay its full silver light across the snow. They were sitting outside the den entrance, close but not touching. The cold was sharp and clean, and the kind of cold she had always found clarifying rather than harsh. "What do you want now?" Solvain asked, not pushing, simply asking the way someone asks when they genuinely want to know and are prepared for any answer. She thought about it honestly. "I don't know everything yet," she said, "but I know I don't want to go back to who I was before. Not the version of me that measured her own worth by someone else's approval." He said, "Good. Is that enough of an answer for you?" "It's exactly enough," he said. And then, after a pause, "Aelira, I invoked the silver claim because the law required it, and it was the right thing to do. But I want you to know, what I feel is not obligation. It hasn't been since the first night." She turned her head to look at him. He was looking at the moon. The silver light caught the angles of his face and made him look ancient and very present at the same time. "I know," she said, quietly. He turned and looked at her. Then, close. The kind of close where you can see the small details, the specific color of his eyes in moonlight, the way his breath was steady and even. "I do not claim you the way Caldris claimed you," he said. "I want you to understand that. I am not asking you to stand beside me as evidence of my power. I am asking you to stand beside me as yourself, whatever that self turns out to be, going forward." She held his gaze. Something in her chest that had been locked and compressed for a long time came quietly apart, not explosively, just released, the way ice releases when the water beneath it starts moving again. "Then yes," she said simply. And there in the moonlight, with the snow bright around them and the stars overhead, and the storm finally finished, Solvain pressed his forehead gently against hers. It was not the formal ceremony of pack bonding, with its witnesses and declarations and old law invocations. It was simpler than that. It was two wolves choosing each other freely, under no obligation but their own. It was the most honest thing she had felt in 3 winters. She let herself lean into him, and the warmth of him surrounded her, the way it had in the storm, steady and absolute. And she understood, fully for the first time, the difference between being claimed and being chosen. The reckoning came without her planning it. Gareth had not stayed silent after the moon circle. He had been gathering, in his quiet way, what he had always been gathering: evidence, observation, the careful record of a wolf who understood that justice, when it came, would need more than grief to stand on. It would need proof. Over the weeks that followed Aelira's exile, Gareth had brought before the pack elders what he had been holding: documentation of Caldris's orders, testimony from wolves he had mistreated, the full account of the night on the ice valley. Not as accusation delivered in anger, but as fact presented with the steady gravity of someone who believed the old law meant something. The elders had listened. Pack law did not permit the exile of Eluna without cause shown. The rejection ceremony had been used without basis. There had been no betrayal, no cowardice, no violation of trust. What had happened was a misuse of power, and the old law had words for that too. Caldris was stripped of his alpha title before the full pack assembly on a clear winter morning when the light was very bright on the snow. Not with drama or violence, with the quiet finality of a verdict delivered by wolves who had found their courage, perhaps later than they should have, but had found it. Vaelith and Aelira, who had carried out the escort to the ice valley's edge, faced formal censure. Aelira bore it with the expression of someone who had known for some time that this reckoning was coming. Vaelith was harder to read, but there was something in his posture that looked, if not like regret, then at least like acknowledgement. Iskera stepped into an interim leadership role with Gareth as her counsel. She was not perfect, no leader was, but she led with the understanding that power was not something to be accumulated, but something to be spent wisely on the good of the group. It was, in its modest way, a beginning. Seraphine left the pack quietly, not driven out. There was no proof of active conspiracy, only of ambition exploited by someone else's cruelty. She went south, back toward the territory she had come from. Her absence was felt less than anyone might have expected. Aelira was not there for any of it. She heard about it later from Gareth, who made the journey to find her when it was over. He came on a morning when the sky was pale blue and clear, and she was outside the den with Sylvain, and she watched the old wolf making his slow way through the snow, with his familiar slight limp and the patient expression that had not changed in all the years she had known him. He stopped before her. He looked at her for a long moment. "I am sorry," he said. "I should have spoken sooner." She looked at her old friend, really looked at him, at the weight he had been carrying, at the cost of his silence and the courage of his eventual action. She put her hand on his shoulder. "You spoke when you were ready," she said, "and it was enough. It was more than enough." He made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that had to work harder than a laugh to stay composed. He looked at Sylvain. Sylvain looked at him. Some understanding passed between them. The quiet acknowledgement of two wolves who both cared for the same person and were not in competition about it. "Will you come back?" Gareth asked her. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the winter light on the snow. She thought about the pack, about the wolves she had fed and cared for and spent herself for, about the den mothers and the young wolves and the ordinary daily life of a community that was, despite everything, nor worth believing in. She thought about who she was now, Not the Luna, defined by her alpha's approval. Not the she-wolf whose worth had been tied to someone else's estimation. Someone who had been left bleeding in the snow and had dragged herself to the tree line, on will alone. Not as what I was, she said. If there is work to be done there, I will do it. But I am not going back to being defined by my position in someone else's structure. Gareth nodded, as though that was exactly what he had expected to hear. Good, he said simply. She felt Sylvain beside her, not directing her, not offering input she hadn't asked for. Simply present, the way he had been from the beginning. Steady, warm, entirely her choice. She had chosen well, she thought. She had chosen herself. And then she had found someone worth choosing. The winter was long still. There were many cold months ahead, but cold was not the same as dark, and dark was not the same as over. Aelira stood in the snow with the old wolf and the silver one, and the sun was working its way up over the ridgeline. And she thought, this is the beginning, not the end, not even close to the end. The beginning. Before we go to the outro, pause for just a moment. This story is about survival, dignity, and finding the one who sees your worth when the world looks away. If it moved you, if it said something you needed to hear, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We read every single one. Your support is what keeps stories like this alive. Thank you. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Some wolves are broken by rejection, others are rebuilt by it. Aelira was never the problem. She had never been too much or too soft or too devoted. She had simply been those things in a place that had not yet grown large enough to deserve them. And the cruelty of coldest, the cruelty of anyone who mistakes another's gentleness for weakness and punishes it, is that it does not only wound the one it targets, it diminishes the one who commits it. He stood in that moon circle believing he was choosing strength. He was choosing smallness. He would carry that long after the memory of her faded. She would not. She had learned something in the snow and the storm and the long warmth of recovery. She had learned that loyalty given to those who do not deserve it is not love. It is hope mistaken for certainty. And when it is finally taken away, it does not end you. It strips everything down to what was true all along. The unbreakable part. The part that dragged itself to the tree line in the dark. That part was hers. It had always been hers. And Sylvain, who saw her not as a role to fill, not as a position to occupy, but as a person worth choosing freely, he was not her rescue. He was her equal. That is the rarest thing in any world. Not someone who saves you, someone who sees you. Thank you for watching and staying to the end. We will see you in the next video.